This is a redo of my first day Rosh Hashanah sermon in 5782. I didn't get a chance to record it that day, so I'm doing it now. I've been a rabbi for 40 years, and I've given basically the same structured sermon every year on the first day of Rosh Hashanah. That Israel needs our help, and the American Jewish community needs our help, and what can we do about it? I do this because the stakeholders are present. It's the largest gathering of Jews in the world at any one time. Not every Jew's in a synagogue, but many Jews are in a synagogue, and they need to hear these lessons. Now, I can't guarantee you're going to hear the same lesson from every rabbi. In fact, I'm sure more and more you're hearing the opposite lesson from most rabbis because they are not protecting Israel. They're attacking Israel from the pulpit, sadly, and they further assimilation in American Judaism. Now, I've been doing this for 40 years, but I'm going back today to a text from 65 years ago, the year I was born, from one of the giant thinkers of the last century in Jewish life, Rabbi Mordechai Kaplan. He had a collection of essays from his rabbi columns in a book that was put together called Questions Jews Ask. And this is actually on the question of Tisha B'Av, which, as you know, is the saddest day in our Jewish year, commemorates the destruction of King Solomon's temple in 586 BCE by the Babylonians. Then the temple was rebuilt, and it was destroyed again on the same day, in 9th of Av, in the year 70. The rebellion against Rome from 132 to 135, led by Bar Kokhba, Beitar, the final act of the rebellion, fell on Tisha B'Av. The Jews were expelled from Spain. Most people think either the 9th or 10th of Av in the year 1492, and many other terrible tragedies. Now, one of the pivotal moments on Tisha B'Av was when the 5 disciples of Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai in the year 70 were gathered at the temple, looking at it, crying because they didn't think that you could have time in 2 months and a day from the 9th of Av till Yom Kippur to offer the Yom Kippur sacrifice and therefore atone for their sins. So while they're crying for their fate, Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai makes the biggest shift in Judaism ever, from the sacrificial system to the system we have today, the Pharisaic rabbinic system, when he says we have a means that's just as efficacious as sacrifice. We have basically the formula that's in the Machzor today. We have tshuva, tefillah, and tzedakah is what we say today. We have prayer, repentance, and deeds of loving kindness. Now, Kaplan's question that he tried to address in 1956 in this essay was, since we have the state of Israel today, now at that time, from 1948 to 1956, it was 8 years old in the state of Israel, the year I was born. He says, well, why should we have Tisha B'Av anymore, which commemorates all this sadness about Jews being powerless, not having the state of Israel? And he gave the following 3 answers, and I'd like to use these answers as a way of organizing my sermon to us today. The first answer is that saying that Israel exists doesn't mean it's secure. First of all, think that it's obviously true. Today we're in the 3rd Jewish Commonwealth. The first spanned the period of Joshua conquering the land until the Jews were driven out, first in 722 BCE by the Assyrians, losing 5 out of every 6 of the tribes. And then in 586, the destruction of Jerusalem and Judah, and the exile of Jews to Babylonia in 586. That was the first Commonwealth. Second Commonwealth only lasted 100 years under the Maccabees, from about 165 BCE till about 63 BCE, when the Romans took over. And now we have the Third Commonwealth, which is now from 1948 till, when I'm recording this, in 2021. So not that long, though it doesn't mean it's secure. And just think about Israel being attacked the day it was created, May 14th, 1948, by 5 Arab armies. Somehow it prevailed. Attacked again in 56 and 67. The surprise Yom Kippur attack in 73. The Intifadas. Hezbollah now, which is an Iranian proxy, has 250,000 missiles in Lebanon from the north. We just had over the summer 4,500 missiles from Hamas, another Iranian-affiliated group in Gaza. We have all these terror tunnels. We got the Syrian nuclear plant where Israel destroyed in 1981. You got Iran now building a nuclear program with missiles, ICBMs, on their platforms, with Hebrews saying bound for Tel Aviv, and a promise from the Iranian leadership that Israel won't be Iran in 25 years. You've got a clock in Iran winding down to when Israel will be destroyed. So on and on and on. You've got all kinds of threats. Israel's the only country in the world where it's okay, evidently, to say we're going to destroy another sovereign country, and people don't protest. You've got the issue of West Bank, these lies that people tell. Ben and Jerry's just stopped selling their ice cream in the West Bank. And then you've got this phony issue about the Palestinians, this made-up group. The only Palestinians ever in history until recently were Jews, the Jewish Palestinians. The Palestinian Post is the Jerusalem Post today. All the coins were Jewish coins. Romans changed the name from Judah to Palestine 2,000 years ago to try to de-Judaize it. And you've got the king of Jordan, you've got the dictator of Syria, all admitting the Palestinians are a made-up group. There's no such thing. You got King Abdullah of Jordan saying Jordan is Palestine, Palestine is Jordan. It's just a lying narrative. And now you got this narrative that Israel's committing genocide against the Palestinians. Complete lies. It lies believed by 40% of European Jews. And even some Jews in America now, according to the latest polls, seem to mouth it. But it's complete garbage. The Middle East is the only place in the whole, Israel is the only place in the whole Middle East where Jews, gays, any gay, Jew and Muslim, Arab are free. Women can realize their potential without restrictions. Where Christians, Muslims, where Christians are safe, the only place in the whole Middle East is Israel. Muslims is the freest there. Palestinians are thriving. This phony made-up people, they're increasing in numbers radically. They live in beautiful communities, most of them. And the only reason some of them still claim refugee status is because the Arabs won't take them. It's the only group in the world that their Arabs won't take their own refugees. I mean, 700,000 Jews were expelled from Arab lands. They'd lived for 2,500 years from 1948 to 952, and Israel took them all. Anybody who wanted to, or they went to the diaspora. And so you don't have a secure Israel at this point. You know, the moonwalk was in 1969. Well, 49 years ago, you had the Munich massacre where Israeli Olympic athletes were massacred by these Palestinian terrorists. I mean, you don't have a secure Israel just because you've got an Israel, and that shows you that Israel is not secure. And even when Israel pulls out completely of Gaza in 2005, you've gotten 25,000 missiles or so aimed at Israel from Gaza. Pulling out isn't not the answer. And so that continues to be a threat. But there is Hakarat Tov, good news. Israel is one of the strongest, most successful nations on earth. The number 3 high-tech startup. Per capita income is one of the highest. And they say it's an apartheid country, excuse me. Ethiopian Jews, it's the only time blacks were ever taken off the continent of Africa for freedom and not slavery. You got every kind of Jew in the world walking down the streets. The Israeli government pays for mosques and churches. The Knesset has Arab haters in it, communists. It's the only democracy in the whole Middle East. You got 1.5 million Arab citizens. How many Jewish citizens are there in any of the Arab countries? You got kosher food now in the UN. You got the UN that's made Yom Kippur a holiday. Miss America, pageants in Israel. You got an Ethiopian Jew who was Miss Israel. You got peace treaties now with Egypt, Jordan, the UAE, Morocco, Bahrain. Israel wants peace. It's demonstrated that over and over and over. It gave the Holy Sinai back when Egypt won in peace. It made the peace deal with Jordan. It's promised, 3 Israeli prime ministers promised this Palestinian so-called people basically all of the West Bank, 98% of the West Bank, and they still turned it down because they're not interested at all in the West Bank. They're interested in the entire thing. They want to steal Jewish land that's always been Jewish, promised by God to Abraham and his descendants, Isaac and Jacob, and so on, ratified by international treaties constantly. They want to steal all of Jewish land and expel the Jews, who are the indigenous people, out of the land. So they need our help. So that's point number 1. Just because Israel exists doesn't mean that it's secure. Point number 2, he says, in 1956 he was writing this, just because there's a Jewish community in the diaspora does not mean that it is secure. Okay, there's 7 million Jews in Israel. There's 7 million Jews outside of Israel. We are 2% of the world's population of what Jews should be had there been no mass murder over the years. Scholars estimate there should be 700 million Jews. There's 2%. In fact, there's a famous story that Bibi Netanyahu tells about meeting with the head of China many years ago, And the head of China said, how many Jews are there? And Bibi thought it was, he should know, but he said there's roughly about 14 million Jews. He says, how could that be? There's 1.5 billion Chinese, there's a billion people from India, we've been around the same amount of time. And Bibi said, well, what's the difference between you and us in India? You've had your own land for at least thousands of years. India's had its own land, and we've been kicked around. We need our secure land. But the greatest threats to the Jews in the diaspora are lack of Jewish knowledge and literacy. But there is anti-Semitism, which is definitely a concern. You got Jews in LA and kosher restaurants being pulled out by Palestinians when the Hamas were firing missiles and beaten up. You have in Naperville, there was an effort to have a peaceful rally in support of Israel, and the police told the Jews they had to disperse because they could not protect them. Can you imagine the United States of America? The police tell a Jewish group that wants to have a peaceful protest, we cannot protect you. You got openly anti-Semites in Congress, open anti-Semites, and they're not shut down. They're appeased and applauded by their leadership. You got Louis Farrakhan, leader of Nation of Islam, calling Jews a gutter religion. You got 80% of Jews are now saying, college kids, that they've been subject to anti-Semitism or they know somebody, a Jew who has, and many of them are starting to hide their Jewish identity. And then you have the New York Times saying that when this effort by the Squad to disallow funding from the U.S. to Israel's Iron Dome to help protect itself against terrorist missiles was shot down, it was shot down by powerful rabbis. Classic anti-Semitism from the New York Times. And now you've got an issue called Jewish privilege. You know, I went to the University of Chicago, 14% Jews there, but if Jews are only 2% of the Jewish population, it's like white privilege. There should only be allowed to have 2% Jews at the University of Chicago. Harvard, 25% Jews undergraduate, should only be allowed 2%, so 23% shouldn't be allowed. It's coming, this idea that Jews are overprivileged, and so you're going to tell your kid now, don't worry about getting a 4.0. Don't worry about achieving high scores in your SATs. It won't do you any good. You can't get into good universities because we used up our quota. That's what's coming in America with this ridiculous nonsense we're facing. So Jews turn out to be the only group where it's okay to be openly anti-Semitic. If you tell any other ethnic attack, you're condemned. But you can be openly anti-Semitic in the Congress, say all kinds of horrible things about Jews in Israel, and they don't say a word. You've got an economic professor accused Israel of cannibalism. You got Biden's Jewish liaison saying Jews in America should stop displaying any evidence that they're Jewish in America. So we are not totally secure. We have been the freest, most prosperous, successful Jewish diaspora ever in history, but I think my generation was the luckiest, and after me, I worry it's going to be much tougher. And we blame ourselves. You know, Kissinger, one of the most high-profile Jews ever, and I'm not 100% sure he said this, but I'm 98% sure he said this based on reports. The guy's 99 years old, I believe, and he said, if it wasn't for the accident of birth that I was born a Jewish, I'd be anti-Semitic. Jews have brought it upon themselves. Can you imagine? There's some idiot Jew thinks this way. And now the third point. The third point that Kaplan makes is, he was writing 11 years after the Holocaust. We must remember the Holocaust. We must not grant Hitler a posthumous victory. The Torah we use in our synagogue is Romanian. It survived the Holocaust somehow. I don't know how. And that Torah was there when half the Jews in Romania were killed by the Nazis. We still read from it today. That is what we've got to continue to do, to live successfully. But just being Jewish is not enough. We have to behave Jewishly. Rosh Hashanah asks, God gave us another year. What are you going to do with it? Our lives can be enhanced by Jewish life. The best answer is to be strong, to help our fellow Jews in Israel, to help continue to build the American Jewish community by living fully Jewishly. That's hopefully what Rosh Hashanah gives us the energy and the desire to do. It means to live more Jewish lives, to be proud of being Jewish, so that Mordechai Kaplan's essay can be read 50 years from now, 100 years from now, and probably will still be answering the same way, asking the same questions, but hopefully from even a stronger position, may we go from strength to strength.